That's my good friend Joe scoring the winning goal and bringing home the championship for the first time. It was really a night to remember. We had a lot to celebrate that night, especially Joe. He's the one holding the trophy. He was our captain, and boy, we were flying high that night. Hey, I'm Bill. I've lived next door to Joe and Diane for more than 12 years. He's a really good guy, a hard worker. He's a great dad to his 2 kids. Unfortunately, the night of his big win, Joe almost lost everything.
Hey, brother, man. It is your night, dude. Your night. Excellent.
Yeah, we were feeling great that night. I noticed Joe had one too many, and I offered to drive him home.
Hey, listen, Joe, you've had a couple of beers. Why don't I drive you home?
But Joe said he felt fine.
Don't worry about it.
You sure?
Good, yeah. Thanks anyway.
Okay, buddy.
I'll see you, okay?
Take care.
He insisted he could drive. I should have insisted otherwise.
Wonder if I could see your driver's license, ownership, and insurance, please.
Sure. It's all in there.
All in there?
Yeah.
Mr. Smith, I noticed the odor of an alcoholic beverage. How long has it been since you consumed a drink of an alcoholic nature, sir?
What I didn't know until Joe's arrest was that each year there are more than 600 deaths and over 60,000 injuries on Ontario roads. About 25% of all traffic fatalities are alcohol-related.
And open this door. Watch your head when you're getting in, please. And once you're in, you can move completely over to the other side of the vehicle.
That night there were a lot of firsts for Joe, like taking a roadside breath test. He found out about blood alcohol concentration levels, or BAC. If you blow over, there are consequences. A BAC of 0.05 to 0.08 gets you a roadside suspension ranging from 3 to 30 days depending on how many times you've been caught. And you have to find some other way of getting home because you can't drive your car. If you blow over 0.08, you've failed.
Impaired drivers come in all shapes and sizes. It could be your next door neighbor. It could be your mother or your father. It could be anyone. And I don't know how many times I've heard when I've called home to tell whoever it is that, your father's been arrested for impaired driving. Are you sure you have the right person? My dad would never do that. Or my mom would never do that. There's all walks of life are impaired drivers.
Joe was smart to cooperate with the police. A lot of people think you can just refuse to take the breath test. But the penalty for failing to provide a breath sample is the same as having a BAC over 0.08. You'll get an immediate 90-day suspension of your license, 7-day vehicle impoundment, and you'll be charged under the Criminal Code of Canada. So refusing to blow just doesn't make any sense. There's zero alcohol tolerance for drivers in the graduated licensing system, as well as for all fully licensed drivers 21 and under. Drivers in these categories who are caught driving with any alcohol in their system will receive an immediate 24-hour roadside license suspension. On conviction, you will face a fine of up to $500 and an additional 30-day license suspension. In addition to these penalties, G1 and G2 drivers who are caught with any alcohol in their blood can face escalating sanctions on conviction.
Mr. Smith, fail on the approved screen provides me with reasonable probable grounds to believe that you've committed the offense of operating a motor vehicle after having consumed alcohol, and I'm arresting you for that offense contrary to the provisions of the Criminal Code of Canada.
Unfortunately for Joe, he blew a fail. That meant the police officer had to take him to the station for additional breath testing. He had to pay to have his car towed from the side of the road. The night that started with a big win at the rink soon turned into his worst nightmare. That night, Joe became one of the thousands of drivers charged each year with impaired. But he was one of the lucky ones. He was safe. There's a lot of other people who aren't so lucky. People whose decision to mix drinking with driving ends up in horrible crashes causing death and serious injury.
To go in and inform a family of their loss is a very difficult thing to do. That absolutely has to be done. I never look forward to it. It's basically you're going to somebody's house and you're shattering their life. You're changing their life forever, and you get all kinds of different reactions. You have to be on your toes because I've had people that dropped to the floor and started banging their head on the floor, just in grief and in disbelief. So you have to be very careful as to what happens, and you have to make sure that you're there as a support to them. And we always bring somebody with us, like either a minister or something along that line to help with that.
I'm going to require 2 samples of breath.
At the police station, Joe had to undergo more intense breath testing on an approved instrument. He blew .12. His license was suspended on the spot for 90 days. The vehicle he was driving was impounded for 7 days, and he had to pay a $150 administrative penalty. He got charged with operation while impaired under the Criminal Code of Canada. He was fingerprinted and had his mugshot taken. Joe, the golden boy from the game, was now looking at a criminal record. It was a rough night all round. When the police released Joe a few hours later, Diane came to pick him up. It was sometime after midnight and the kids were asleep. Man, it's hard to believe something like this could happen to a guy like Joe. He and Diane had a lot to sort out in a short time. They were in a state of shock, but it started to sink in. Life was about to change big time. Joe was in sales and he needed his car the next day to make calls with his boss. He was supposed to drive their daughter Tracy and her friends to school in the morning. And what would his parents think? Never mind the rest of his family and friends. But what was he going to say to his boss? But Joe's nightmare was just beginning. There was still his court date to come.
Ontario Court just now in session. Please be seated.
The judge convicted Joe of operation while impaired under the Criminal Code of Canada. Because this was Joe's first offense, he found out in court that he had to pay a minimum $1,000 fine, and he wouldn't be able to drive for at least 1 year. He also learned he had to successfully complete a remedial education or treatment program at a cost of $578. He would have to pay $150 to have his license reinstated after serving a suspension period. And he would have an ignition interlock condition on his license for at least 1 year after he got his license back.
May I have your license, sir? Thank you.
For repeat offenders, it's a different story. As a repeat offender, the laws are a lot tougher. Trust me, you don't want to go there. Second offense means you won't be able to drive for at least 3 years, a jail sentence, the mandatory remedial program again, and a minimum of 3 years with the ignition interlock condition. On a third offense, you end up with even more jail time, and you can lose your license for good. Ontario's tough on impaired drivers. You pay a price when you don't separate drinking from driving. And it's not just a personal price. The actual out-of-pocket costs are huge. Joe and Diane had to dip into their savings, big time. Joe's income depended on his sales commissions, and because he couldn't drive, his customers were given to someone else. So he took a big hit in pay. Plus, he had to pay his fine, and the lawyer cost him too.
Well, lawyers' fees are by the hour. So if we take, for example, $250 an hour, which would be very conservative, 8 hours in court as an estimate, and a minimum of, say, 4 hours preparation, that would be $3,000. I would say that would be the base to go to trial pretty well. From there, it could go up pretty well. The sky's the limit. If you have to hire a toxicologist or another expert, that's all added on to the legal fees, obviously, so it could be many thousands of dollars. And of course, your trial may not be completed in 1 day. If you go to another day, you can pretty well double all those costs. In some cases, I could hardly describe the horrific effect it has on some of these people to realize that they're now in a criminal courtroom. In fact, when they attend the court, often they can't believe some of the other people that they see there. But they're on the same docket. They're charged pursuant to the same law, the Criminal Code of Canada. And for some people, that stigma is something that's very difficult to deal with because they never thought they would be in that position. And in fact, they wouldn't have intentionally ever done anything to get into that position. So quite often that is severe embarrassment. Socially, of course, they don't want, in many cases, they don't want their friends and neighbors to know. So that's pretty significant for a lot of people.
Besides the money, the big deal is that my friend Joe now has a criminal record. If he's convicted again, it'll be as a repeat offender. A criminal record not only affects your reputation, it can affect your career, your car insurance, and it can prevent you from traveling out of the country. It's a big price to pay for such a stupid mistake. When Joe got a suspension notice in the mail, it came with some info on the remedial course he had to take called Back on Track. It cost him $578, and he had to successfully complete it before his license would be reinstated. So it was important for him to register as soon as he received his notice, or his license reinstatement could have been delayed. Back on Track can take up to 11 months to complete. Once Back on Track assessed Joe, he was assigned to a program that included presentations, discussions, and group work. Diane had to drive him to the classes, and it cut into his valuable quality time with the kids. But it had huge value to Joe. It got him back on track and taught him how to separate his drinking from his driving to help him avoid ever getting charged with the same mistake again. 6 months after completing the classroom component, Joe had to arrange a follow-up interview. Before he got his certificate of completion, they wanted to make sure he was successful in meeting his goals. He learned you can either drink or drive. You know, keep the two activities separate and still have a good time. Joe was smart and never drove during his suspension. He'd heard a few things about the vehicle impoundment program, and he knew the law in Ontario is tough on impaired drivers who drive while under suspension. Drivers caught while their license is suspended for a criminal code driving conviction will have the vehicle they are driving impounded for a minimum of 45 days. This is the case regardless of whether the vehicle is rented, leased, or borrowed from a friend or family member. The vehicle will be impounded, and the owner of the vehicle is liable for all towing and impoundment costs, even if they are not the one caught driving without a license. If Joe had risked driving while under suspension for a criminal code driving offense and been caught, as a first-time offender, he would have been hit with a fine of $5,000 to $25,000. In addition, any driver convicted under the criminal code for driving while disqualified risks up to 5 years in prison, and that's above and beyond any legal costs. After a year, Joe's suspension was finally up. He had successfully completed the Remedial Measures program and had to pay $150 to get his license reinstated. That's when the increased costs of his insurance hit him, big time.
Clearly, this is not a short-term proposition. Once convicted of impaired driving, this will be placed on your record, and you will be deemed a high-risk driver, and you will carry this status for about 3 to 6 years. Along comes with that a higher than average insurance premiums. You can expect to pay anywhere between $3,000 to $12,000 a year in insurance coverage. As well, with the higher coverage, the market for high-risk drivers is very small because more and more companies are not writing people convicted of impaired driving. So you have less choice to where you go and higher price. Well, it affects all of us because the basic principle of insurance is the pooling of risk. So we all share in everyone's accidents, and the more impaired convictions we have out there, the more we all pay for it. It's very costly.
Now, Joe wasn't out of the woods yet. He had done everything right and he had paid the price. But, like all convicted impaired drivers, his license was reinstated with an I in the condition field for a minimum of 1 year. This means he can only operate a vehicle equipped with the ignition interlock device. It's a great tool to help guys like Joe learn to separate the drinking from the driving. Drivers who choose to drive while their license is subject to an ignition interlock condition must have an approved ignition interlock device installed in their vehicle. Drivers who operate a motor vehicle in violation of an ignition interlock license condition will have their vehicle impounded by police for a period of 7 days and may be subject to further charges under the Criminal Code of Canada or Highway Traffic Act. Drivers convicted of driving without an ignition interlock or for tampering with the device will face fines ranging from $200 to $20,000 for commercial vehicles and $200 to $1,000 for other motor vehicles. Vehicle owners who knowingly allow a person with an ignition interlock condition to drive their vehicle may also be convicted under the Highway Traffic Act. Every 60 days, participants are required to attend the service provider to download interlock data and to calibrate the device. Ignition interlock program violations for tampering, driving without a device, or missing an appointment with the ignition interlock service provider will be reported to the Ministry of Transportation. This includes Highway Traffic Act convictions and reports of tampering from the service provider. Program violations will increase the amount of time the ignition interlock condition remains on the license.
The interlock system is essentially a breathalyzer, one that's connected to the vehicle and links its operations with the vehicle itself. The person, before they start the vehicle, if they want to drive, they must take and pass a breath alcohol test. The unit has a preset fail level, and if the breath alcohol concentration in the sample is below the preset level, then the vehicle can be started and driven. If the alcohol concentration is above the preset level, the vehicle will not start.
The ignition interlock device cost Joe between $150 and $300 to install in his vehicle and $105 per month for monitoring until the eye condition is removed from his license. He must also pay a $250 security deposit prior to installation that is returned on removal of the device if it's in working condition. Joe has the option of paying a non-refundable $10 per month insurance premium instead of the security deposit. He must also pay $50 to have the device removed from his vehicle once the eye condition has been removed from his driver's license, and all costs are subject to HST.
The financial costs of Joe's conviction hit him hard. In the end, he took quite a hit for his stupid decision that night after the game. I just wish I had done more to stop him when I had the chance. When he had those beers at the rink, then got in his car, neither of us had any idea what a high price he'd pay.
In hard costs, Joe paid $1,000 for his fine, $578 for his remedial course, $150 reinstatement fee, and about $2,000 for 1 year with the interlock system. On top of that, legal fees can range from $5,000 to $15,000 or more. Vehicle insurance can increase to more than $10,000 annually. A first-time impaired driving conviction can cost as much as $20,000 or more.
And that's just the financial part. The price Joe paid for driving impaired on a personal basis was big time too. The pain and embarrassment, not just for himself, but for his whole family and friends, well, it was huge. But when you think about it, Joe is one of the lucky ones because he didn't hurt or kill anyone. That's why these laws exist. We need to stop this crime because the costs are just too high. Many other impaired drivers aren't as fortunate as Joe, and they end up severely injuring or killing someone. You don't even want to think about the criminal consequences if you hurt or kill someone. And to live the rest of your life knowing you killed someone's husband, or wife, or child, life is never the same.
Well, I can speak firsthand because I've lost both my father and my son in impaired driving crashes, and it devastates families. It totally destroys them because they have somebody who's there, and they go out one night and they never come home again. There's no preparation for that death, and I think one of the things that makes people really angry is that it doesn't have to happen. Well, I think Ontario has done a terrific job. I think they've done to bring in the ignition interlock bill, which I think is really great, and particularly that it targets first-time offenders. I think that, if you can stop people that first time that they've been caught for impaired driving, and hopefully, by separating the two the two things, that it will stop people from becoming second-time and third-time offenders.
Do yourself a favor and separate the drinking from the driving. It's simple. If you're going out and know you'll be drinking, plan ahead. Take a cab or let a designated driver who is not drinking do the driving. Or make arrangements to stay the night and stay safe. And if you see a friend who's had a few get behind the wheel, be a real friend. Take away the keys and call him a cab.
You should also call 911 anytime you spot a suspected impaired driver on the road. You could be saving a life. It's been more than a year since Joe was first pulled over by the police. He's got a new job now and they're finally getting back on their feet. Joe paid a huge price, but he's learned his lesson. He knows it could have been a lot worse. He could have killed or hurt somebody. Take it from my friend Joe. Do the right thing. Don't drive drunk. It'll cost you big time.